I am Rachel Anderson, 25 years old, and I survived a house fire that was no accident. The night my parents tried to kill me, I discovered my bedroom windows nailed shut as smoke filled my lungs. My desperate screams alerted neighbors, while my parents drove away thinking I would perish in the flames. They told firefighters the smoke alarms malfunctioned, and they tried to save me. But the 911 recording captured my truth. They nailed my windows. I cannot get out. They want me to die. Before I share how my own parents tried to kill me, let me know where you are watching from and hit subscribe if you want more stories of survival against all odds. I grew up in Riverside, a quiet suburban neighborhood in Northern California, where our house with its white picket fence and manicured lawn looked like something out of a magazine. To outsiders, we were the picture-perfect American family. My dad, Frank, worked as an accountant at a local firm, while my mom, Diane, taught second grade at the elementary school. They were respected in the community, active in the local church, and always the first to bring casseroles when someone was sick. But behind closed doors, our reality was very different. From my earliest memories, my parents controlled every aspect of my life. They monitored my friendships, screened my phone calls, and dictated my activities. Their intrusion was always framed as protection and love. "We just want what is best for you, Rachel," my mother would say as she read through my diary. "The world is dangerous, especially for young girls," my father would explain, while installing yet another security camera. My education became another avenue for their control. They selected my classes, met with my teachers regularly to discuss my progress, and required detailed reports about my daily activities at school. When college applications came around, they only allowed me to apply to the local community college so I could continue living at home. "Why would you waste money on dormitories when you have a perfectly good room here?" my father reasoned. "Plus, we can make sure you are focusing on your studies instead of partying like those other college kids." Despite their suffocating presence, I managed small acts of rebellion. I would occasionally sneak out to the local coffee shop to meet friends. I created secret social media accounts they never discovered. I started saving money from my part-time campus job, hiding cash in a hollowed-out copy of Pride and Prejudice my mother would never touch since she considered fiction a waste of time. By 25, I had completed my business degree and secured a position at a marketing firm in the city. The job came with a substantial salary increase, enough that I could finally afford my own apartment. When I announced my plans to move out, my parents reacted with a strange mix of passive-aggressive comments and forced smiles. "You will regret throwing away free housing," my father said, his knuckles white as he gripped his fork during dinner. "Who will look after you if you get sick?" my mother asked, her voice trembling slightly. Yet, surprisingly, after a few days of tension, they seemed to accept my decision. My mother even offered to help me pack, and my father mentioned he could assist with moving furniture. Their sudden change in attitude should have been my first warning sign, but I was too relieved to question it. The weekend before the fire, we had our last family dinner. My parents were unusually pleasant, even suggesting we order from my favorite Italian restaurant instead of my mother cooking as usual. "To celebrate your promotion," my father said, raising his glass of wine in a toast. My mother even gave me her grandmother's pearl necklace, saying it was time I had it. "Every independent woman needs good pearls," she said, with a smile that did not quite reach her eyes. That same evening, my best friend Amanda called. We had been friends since high school, one of the few relationships my parents reluctantly tolerated. "Something feels off about their sudden acceptance," Amanda said after I told her about their change in behavior. "They have never let you make your own decisions before. Why would they start now?" "Maybe they finally realize I am an adult," I replied, not wanting to acknowledge the unease her words stirred in me. "They cannot control me forever." "Just be careful," Amanda warned. "People who are used to having power do not give it up easily." I dismissed her concerns, choosing to believe my parents had finally accepted my independence. Over the next few weeks, I quietly packed my belongings, arranging for Amanda to store some boxes at her apartment so my parents would not notice how much I was taking. I had already signed the lease on a small one-bedroom apartment downtown close to my office. In just 2 more days, I would pick up the keys and finally start my independent life. The night before the fire, I went to sleep feeling both anxious and hopeful. I had most of my essential items packed, my new apartment was waiting, and I believed I could maintain a healthier relationship with my parents once I had established some physical distance. I even imagined regular Sunday dinners where we could interact as adults rather than as controller and controlled. I had no idea that by attempting to leave, I had triggered something dark and possessive in them that would lead to unimaginable betrayal. The night before the fire, I was jolted awake around midnight by strange noises coming from outside my bedroom. It sounded like scratching and light hammering, but when I opened my door to investigate, the hallway was empty and dark. My father appeared from their bedroom, claiming he had just used the bathroom. "Go back to sleep, Rachel. You need your rest for work tomorrow," he said, his tone unusually firm. I noticed his hands were behind his back, but when I tried to look, he quickly turned and walked away. The next morning, I discovered several important documents missing from my desk drawer. My folder containing apartment information, the signed lease agreement, and the receipt for my security deposit had vanished. When I confronted my parents at breakfast, they exchanged confused glances. "We have not touched anything in your room," my mother said, buttering her toast with precise movements. "Are you sure you did not misplace them?" "Maybe you left them at work," my father suggested, not looking up from his newspaper. Frustrated but running late, I left for the office planning to print another copy of the lease during my lunch break. When I returned home that evening, I found my bedroom door locked from the outside. I called out for my parents, and my father appeared a few minutes later. "Sorry about that," he said, fiddling with the doorknob. "Something is wrong with the lock. It has been malfunctioning all day." I stepped into my room and immediately noticed things were slightly out of place. My drawers were not closed completely, and my closet door stood ajar. When I checked my hiding spots, I discovered my passport, birth certificate, and social security card were missing. "Have you seen my important documents?" I asked during dinner, watching their faces carefully. "What documents?" my mother asked, her expression perfectly innocent. "My birth certificate, passport, social security card. They were in my room this morning." My father frowned. "Are you sure? You have been rather forgetful lately. Remember how you thought someone moved your car keys last week, but they were in your coat pocket all along?" I did not remember any such incident with my car keys, but before I could say so, my mother reached across the table to touch my hand. "Darling, this is exactly why your father and I worry about you living alone. You would misplace everything without us helping you stay organized." Later that night, I discovered my bank card was missing from my wallet. A call to the bank revealed someone had attempted to change my mailing address back to my parents' house, but the request had been flagged because it was not made from my registered phone number. My growing suspicion was interrupted by my father knocking on my bedroom door. He entered carrying a toolbox. "Just checking the wiring," he explained, moving toward the smoke detector in my room. "A few of them around the house seem to be malfunctioning. Better safe than sorry." I watched as he fiddled with the device, noticing how he removed something small from inside it before replacing the cover. That evening, my mother brought me a cup of tea as I sat on my bed reviewing work documents. "You seem tense," she observed. "I added some of my sleeping pills to help you relax. You have been so anxious lately." I waited until she left before pouring the tea down the bathroom sink. Later, I called Amanda from the backyard, keeping my voice low. "Something weird is happening. My documents are disappearing, and I think my parents might have tampered with my tea." "Rachel, this is not normal," Amanda said, her voice urgent. "Come stay with me tonight." "I cannot. All my important stuff is here, and I need to find my documents. Plus, I am probably overreacting. They are my parents after all." "Parents do not steal their adult daughter's documents," Amanda countered. As I headed back inside, I noticed a strange smell near the garage. It reminded me of gasoline, but when I mentioned it, my father quickly explained he had been working on the lawnmower. "Nothing to worry about," he assured me, his smile not reaching his eyes. That night, I decided I would leave the next day, regardless of the missing documents. I could always order replacements later. I fell asleep feeling uneasy but determined, dismissing the worst of my fears as paranoia. After all, these were my parents. They might be controlling and manipulative, but surely they would not actually harm me. I had no idea how wrong I was. The acrid smell of smoke invaded my dreams before I fully woke. My eyes snapped open to a room filled with gray haze, the air thick and suffocating. Disoriented, I reached for my phone to check the time, 2:17 a.m. The smoke detector remained eerily silent. "Mom, Dad," I shouted, leaping from my bed and rushing to the door. The handle turned, but the door would not budge. I pushed harder, then threw my shoulder against it, but it remained firmly shut. That was when I realized with dawning horror it was locked from the outside. "Help! Is anyone there?" I called again, panic rising in my chest. The smoke was getting thicker, seeping under the door in dark tendrils. No response came from the hallway, only the distant sound of crackling that I recognized as fire-consuming wood. My instinct drove me to the window, the logical escape route. I yanked at the frame, expecting it to slide up as it always had, but it remained firmly in place. Confused, I peered closer in the dim light and saw what had been done. Fresh nails had been hammered around the edges, sealing the window shut. The wood around them looked newly splintered. "No, no, no," I whispered, my heart hammering against my ribs. I grabbed my desk chair and swung it against the glass, expecting it to shatter. Instead, it bounced off with a dull thud. I tried again harder, but the glass was designed not to break easily, a safety feature that had now become a death trap. The smoke was growing thicker by the second. I dropped to my knees where the air was slightly clearer and reached for my phone. No signal. When I tried to call emergency services, the call would not go through. Someone had enabled airplane mode and set a restriction that required a passcode to disable it. Coughing violently, I crawled to my laptop, praying the Wi-Fi still worked. I opened the browser with trembling fingers and managed to connect to the emergency services website that allowed internet calls. As the page loaded agonizingly slowly, I dragged myself back to the window to see if anyone outside might help. What I saw through the glass made my blood freeze. My parents' car was backing out of the driveway, headlights cutting through the night as they drove away from the house, from the burning house, from me. The horrifying truth crashed over me like a wave. This was not an accident. The locked door, the nailed windows, the disabled smoke detectors, the missing documents, the attempts to drug me with tea, the strange noises the night before, all of it suddenly formed a clear, terrifying picture. My own parents had set the house on fire to kill me. Memories flashed through my mind, recontextualizing years of controlling behavior. How they had gradually isolated me from friends. How they had insurance forms spread out on the kitchen table last week, quickly gathered up when I entered. How my father had casually mentioned what a shame it would be if something happened to me before I could waste my life moving away. The smoke was now so thick I could barely see across the room. My eyes burned and each breath sent daggers through my lungs. I wetted a towel in my bathroom sink and pressed it against the door crack, then covered my nose and mouth with my shirt. In my desperate search for any escape, I noticed the air vent near the ceiling. Could I remove the cover and crawl through? But when I managed to stand on my desk to reach it, I discovered it had been sealed shut with what looked like industrial glue. They had thought of everything. Back at my laptop, I finally connected to emergency services, the operator's voice coming through as I collapsed onto the floor, the room spinning around me. "This is 911. What is your emergency?" The voice sounded distant underwater. "Fire," I gasped. 22 Oak Street. Trapped in bedroom. Parents. I could not finish the sentence as another coughing fit overtook me. The psychological impact hit me as hard as the physical danger. My own parents wanted me dead. The people who gave me life had decided to end it rather than let me live independently. The betrayal was so profound, so absolute, that my mind struggled to process it even as my body fought for each breath. With the last of my strength, I crawled back to the window and pounded on the glass, screaming for help. My vision was beginning to blur, darkness creeping in at the edges. The laptop speaker still carried the dispatcher's voice, asking questions I could no longer focus enough to answer. The windows I managed to choke out. They nailed my windows shut. I cannot get out. They want me to die. The last thing I remember before losing consciousness was the distant wail of sirens seeming to come from another world entirely. The 911 operator's voice crackled through my laptop speakers, confused by the unusual internet call connection. "Ma'am, can you clarify your location and situation?" she asked, as I pressed my face closer to the floor where a thin layer of breathable air remained. 22 Oak Street, I gasped, my throat burning. "Bedroom on second floor, east side. Fire. I am trapped." "Is anyone else in the house with you?" the operator asked, her tone shifting to urgent professionalism. "No, my parents. They did this." I screamed, a surge of adrenaline, giving my voice unexpected strength. "They nailed my windows. I cannot get out. They want me to die." There was a momentary pause on the line. "Did you say someone nailed your windows shut?" The operator's voice was careful, measured. "Yes, my parents. They locked my door from outside, too. They set the fire and drove away. Please hurry." Another coughing fit overtook me, leaving me retching and gasping. "Stay as low to the ground as possible," the operator instructed. "Cover your mouth with a wet cloth if you can. Emergency services are on their way. Estimated arrival is 4 minutes. Stay on the line with me." The smoke had become so dense that the ceiling was no longer visible. My eyes streamed tears that evaporated in the rising heat. Each breath felt like inhaling broken glass. The fire had not yet breached my bedroom door, but I could hear it consuming the house, a hungry living thing coming closer. "Keep talking to me," the operator urged. "What is your name?" "Rachel," I wheezed. "Rachel Anderson." "Rachel, I need you to stay conscious. The fire department is almost there." Through the window, I could see flashing lights illuminating the street. Neighbors had gathered on the sidewalk, pointing up at my window where smoke was now visibly seeping through the edges. I summoned the last of my strength and pounded on the glass again. "Help up here," the words tore through my raw throat. One of my neighbors, Jerry, from across the street, spotted my faint silhouette through the window. I saw him pointing urgently, then running to his garage. Moments later, he returned with a ladder, propping it against the side of the house. "Someone is trying to reach your window," the operator relayed, apparently receiving updates from first responders who had arrived at the scene. Through my fading vision, I saw Jerry climbing a hammer in his hand. He reached my window and began attacking the nails from the outside, his face contorted with effort. But the task was too difficult from his precarious position on the ladder. The wail of sirens grew louder until red and blue lights flooded my smoke-filled room. I could hear shouts from below, the sound of heavy equipment, the crackling of radios. "Fire department has arrived," the operator confirmed. "They know your location and that you are trapped. They are coming for you, Rachel." The smoke had become so thick I could no longer see the window. My lungs refused to draw breath, and the edges of my consciousness were fraying. I slumped to the floor, unable to keep my head up any longer. Distantly, I heard a massive crash as my window exploded inward. Glass shards rained across the room as a dark figure in firefighting gear burst through the opening. Strong arms wrapped around me, lifting me as though I weighed nothing. "I have got her," a muffled voice shouted through an oxygen mask. "Victim secured, beginning extraction." The firefighter carried me to the window, where a rescue platform from a ladder truck now waited. As we moved into the night air, I gulped desperately, but my body had forgotten how to breathe properly. My rescuer laid me on the platform and placed an oxygen mask over my face. The cool, clean oxygen was the most wonderful thing I had ever felt. "Stay with us," a paramedic urged as the platform descended. "You are going to be okay." But the damage had been done. As the platform reached the ground and I was transferred to a waiting gurney, darkness closed in completely. The last sensations I registered were the cold night air on my skin, the firm pressure of the oxygen mask, and the rhythmic wail of the ambulance siren as consciousness slipped away. I floated in and out of awareness during the ambulance ride. Fragments of conversation reached me through the fog. Severe smoke inhalation. Possible airway burns. Carbon monoxide levels critical. The hospital emergency room was a blur of bright lights, urgent voices, and gloved hands. Doctors and nurses swarmed around me, attaching monitors, inserting IVs, checking vital signs. Through it all, I struggled to communicate what had happened, but the oxygen mask in my damaged throat made speech impossible. Just as the medical team seemed to stabilize me, a commotion erupted at the entrance to the treatment area. My parents had arrived, their faces masks of concern and distress. "That is our daughter," my mother cried, pushing past a nurse. "Rachel, honey, thank God you are alive." My father stood behind her, his expression appropriately grim and worried. "What happened? Is she going to be okay?" The attending physician stepped forward. "Are you her parents? Can you tell us what happened?" My mother's performance was flawless, tears streaming down her face as she clutched my father's arm. We woke up to smoke. Frank tried to get to Rachel's room, but the hallway was already engulfed in flames. We had to go outside and wait for the fire department. "The smoke alarms malfunctioned," my father added, his voice breaking with manufactured emotion. "We tried to save her, but we could not get through. It was a miracle the firefighters reached her in time. I thrashed weakly on the gurney, trying to signal that they were lying. A nurse noticed my agitation and leaned closer. "Are you trying to tell us something?" she asked. I managed to pull the oxygen mask aside for just a moment. "They did it." I rasped the words barely audible. "They trapped me." My mother stepped forward quickly. "She is confused from the smoke. The doctor said that might happen, right?" She directed this question to the physician, who nodded uncertainly. "Confusion can be a symptom of carbon monoxide poisoning," he confirmed. My father shook his head sadly. "Poor Rachel. She has always had an active imagination, and lately she has been under so much stress with work." Before I could attempt to speak again, a new figure appeared in the doorway of the treatment room. A man in plain clothes showed a badge to the medical staff. "Detective Mark Reynolds' arson investigation," he announced. "I need to speak with the family about the fire at 22 Oak Street." As the detective approached, my mother dabbed at her eyes with a tissue. "Our daughter is in no condition to answer questions right now," she said firmly. "I understand," the detective replied, his eyes moving between my parents and me. "But I do have some preliminary findings I would like to discuss." A nurse chose that moment to administer something into my IV line. "This will help you rest," she told me gently. As the medication pulled me under, I heard the detective saying something about a 911 call and recordings. The last thing I saw was the flash of worry that passed between my parents before darkness claimed me once again. I opened my eyes to find sunlight streaming through unfamiliar blinds. The antiseptic smell and the steady beep of monitors confirmed I was still in the hospital. A man in a chair beside my bed straightened up when he noticed I was awake. "Miss Anderson, I am Officer Wilson," he said, showing me his badge. "I have been assigned to keep watch over your room. How are you feeling?" My throat felt like I had swallowed broken glass, but I managed to croak out. "How long?" "You have been unconscious for 2 days," he explained. "The doctors had you sedated while your lungs recovered from the smoke damage." Memories of the fire flooded back, sending my heart rate monitor into a frenzy. I tried to sit up, panic rising. "My parents," I rasped. "Where are they?" Officer Wilson gently pressed me back against the pillows. "They are in the waiting room. They have been here the whole time, but they are not permitted in your room without supervision." Before I could ask why, the door opened, and a man in a suit entered, followed by a woman in a police uniform. "Miss Anderson, I am Detective Mark Reynolds with the Arson Investigation Unit," the man said, showing his badge. "This is Sergeant Patel. We would like to ask you some questions about what happened, if you feel up to it." I nodded, reaching for the water cup on the bedside table. After taking a painful sip, I whispered, "They tried to kill me." Detective Reynolds pulled up a chair. "Your parents have given their statement. They claim they woke up to smoke and tried to reach your room, but the fire had already blocked the hallway. They say they had no choice but to exit the house and wait for emergency services." "They are lying." I managed my voice slightly stronger. "They locked my door from outside. They nailed my windows shut. They left me to die." Sergeant Patel spoke up. "We need you to tell us exactly what happened in your own words." For the next 30 minutes, I recounted everything from my plans to move out to the strange behaviors leading up to the fire, and finally the horrifying realization that my own parents had tried to murder me. Speaking was excruciating, but I forced the words out, determined to be heard. When I finished, Detective Reynolds nodded solemnly. "Miss Anderson, there is something you should know. The 911 call you made was recorded." He pulled out a tablet and tapped the screen. My own voice, raw with terror, filled the hospital room. "They nailed my windows. I cannot get out. They want me to die." "This recording directly contradicts your parents' version of events," he continued, "and it is not the only evidence we have." Detective Reynolds showed me photographs of my bedroom window with nails, clearly visible around the frame. "These are fresh hammer marks," he explained. "The tool marks match a hammer we found in your father's workshop, complete with wood splinters that match your window frame." More photos showed the exterior lock that had been installed on my bedroom door. This lock was new. The receipt for its purchase was found in your father's wallet, dated just 3 days ago. The fire investigation had revealed multiple points of origin throughout the house, a clear indicator of arson. All the smoke detectors had been disabled with their batteries and critical components removed. We also discovered a life insurance policy taken out on you 6 months ago, Sergeant Patel added. It names your parents as beneficiaries with a double indemnity clause for accidental death. The evidence continued to mount. Their browser history showed research on house fires and accidental deaths. My packed bags had been found hidden in the trunk of their car, along with my missing documents. Security cameras at a gas station 10 miles from your home captured footage of your parents filling 2 containers with gasoline the night of the fire, Detective Reynolds said, showing me the time-stamped images. The most damning evidence came from their own devices. My father's phone contained text messages between my parents discussing the plan, including a message sent just before the fire that read, "It is done. No one will suspect anything but a tragic accident." Your parents were arrested yesterday, Detective Reynolds concluded. They are currently being held without bail, charged with attempted murder, arson, false imprisonment, and conspiracy. I closed my eyes, overwhelmed by the confirmation of my worst nightmare. The knowledge that I had proof that I would be believed brought both relief and a deeper kind of pain. My own parents had not only tried to kill me, but had planned it meticulously, leaving nothing to chance. What happens now? I asked. You focus on recovering, Sergeant Patel said kindly. We will need your formal statement when you are stronger and eventually your testimony in court. But for now, you are safe. We have an officer assigned to your room around the clock just as a precaution. As they prepared to leave, I asked one more question. Have they admitted it? Have they said why? Detective Reynolds paused at the door. They are still maintaining their innocence. But with the evidence we have, their denials do not matter anymore. After they left, I lay back against the pillows trying to process everything. The betrayal was so enormous, so incomprehensible that my mind struggled to contain it. These were the people who had brought me into the world, who should have protected me at all costs. Instead, they had chosen to destroy me rather than let me live my own life. For the first time since the fire, I allowed myself to cry, the tears flowing freely for what I had lost, for the family I had never truly had, and for the innocence that had burned away in the flames. The months following the fire passed in a blur of recovery and legal proceedings. My physical healing progressed steadily, though doctors warned that my lungs might never fully recover from the damage. The psychological wounds proved far more resistant to treatment. 2 months after the fire, I met with the prosecutor assigned to my case, a formidable woman named Julia Matthews, along with a victim advocate named Carlos, who would help me navigate the complicated legal process ahead. The evidence against your parents is overwhelming, Julia explained during our first meeting. But I need to prepare you for what is coming. Their defense will try to paint you as unstable, possibly even suicidal. They will claim you set the fire yourself and invented the story about them to avoid consequences. I underwent a thorough psychological evaluation, which concluded I had suffered years of emotional abuse and exhibited signs of what the psychologist called coercive control by my parents. This evaluation would prove crucial in countering the defense's inevitable attacks on my credibility. The case attracted significant media attention. Local news covered it extensively, and several national outlets picked up the story, captivated by the shocking narrative of parents attempting to murder their adult daughter rather than allow her independence. My parents' family members split into factions. My father's brother and sister stood firmly with me, sharing stories of controlling behavior they had witnessed over the years. My mother's side largely rallied behind them, suggesting I had always been troubled and attention-seeking. At the preliminary hearing, my parents appeared in court in matching orange jumpsuits, looking smaller and older than I remembered. They pleaded not guilty to all charges, avoiding eye contact with me as I sat with the prosecutor. During the discovery phase, even more disturbing evidence came to light. Investigators uncovered a pattern of what now appeared to be previous attempts on my life disguised as accidents or coincidences. 3 incidents of food poisoning over the past year, which my parents had attributed to undercooked restaurant meals, now seemed suspicious. Tests on preserved samples from our home freezer revealed traces of toxic substances in food containers labeled specifically for my consumption. Most chilling was the discovery that my car's brake lines had been tampered with 6 months earlier. The mechanic who repaired them had noted it in his records, but accepted my father's explanation that road debris must have caused the damage. The timing coincided perfectly with my first serious attempt to move out, which I had abandoned after the car incident made me financially unable to afford the security deposit. Financial motives emerged as the investigation deepened. My parents were deeply in debt with credit card balances exceeding $100,000. My father had a gambling problem he had concealed for years, and they had taken out a second mortgage on the house without my knowledge. The life insurance policy on me was worth $500,000, with an additional $500,000 for accidental death. They had also forged my signature on documents making them beneficiaries of my retirement account and the small inheritance my grandmother had left me. As the trial date approached, my parents' united front began to crumble. They retained separate legal representation, and their defense strategies increasingly involved blaming each other. My mother's attorney suggested she had been coerced by my father, portraying her as another victim of his controlling nature. My father's lawyer countered by presenting evidence that the plan had been my mother's idea, with meticulously detailed notes found in her handwriting outlining the steps needed to make the fire appear accidental. Finally, nearly a year after the fire, the trial began. I took the stand on the second day, facing my parents directly for the first time since the hospital. My father stared at the table before him while my mother attempted to catch my eye, her expression, a carefully constructed mask of maternal concern. For 4 hours, I testified about my childhood, the escalating control, the isolation, and finally the horrific night of the fire. The defense attorneys tried repeatedly to trip me up, suggesting I had imagined the locked door and nailed windows in my panic, or that I might have done these things myself in a cry for attention. Rachel, my mother's attorney, asked, her voice dripping with false sympathy. Is it not true that you have struggled with fantasy scenarios since childhood? That you often blamed others for things you did yourself? Before I could answer, the prosecutor objected, reminding the court that no evidence of any psychological instability had been presented, while extensive documentation of my parents' controlling behavior had been entered into record. The neighbors who had heard my screams testified next, describing how they had clearly heard me shouting about nailed windows and being trapped. The firefighter who rescued me confirmed the nails in the window frames and the exterior lock on my bedroom door, both clear fire code violations that would never be installed for safety reasons. The forensic evidence presentation lasted 3 days, with experts meticulously walking the jury through the timeline of planning and execution. Cell phone tower data showed my parents' phones leaving the area just minutes after the fire started. Gas station security footage showed them filling containers the night before. Hardware store receipts confirmed the purchase of nails, wood glue, and a new lock. After 2 weeks of testimony, the case went to the jury. They deliberated for less than 5 hours before returning with their verdict: guilty on all counts for both parents. At the sentencing hearing the following month, my parents were given the opportunity to speak. My father, looking aged beyond his years, read from a prepared statement expressing regret for how things turned out, but never actually admitting his actions or apologizing to me. My mother's statement was more direct, but equally disturbing. I only wanted what was best for my daughter, she insisted, her voice breaking. Everything I did was out of love. Rachel was making poor choices that would have ruined her life. Sometimes a mother has to make difficult decisions to protect her child. The judge was unmoved. The court finds nothing protective about trapping your daughter in a burning building, he stated firmly. This case represents one of the most disturbing perversions of parental authority I have encountered in my 30 years on the bench. He sentenced them each to 30 years in prison without the possibility of parole for 20 years. When it came time for my victim impact statement, I approached the podium slowly, still bearing the physical effects of the smoke damage to my lungs. The worst part is not the physical pain or the nightmares I told the silent courtroom. It is knowing that the people who were supposed to love me unconditionally saw me as nothing more than a possession they would rather destroy than let go. But I am still here. I am still breathing. And I will build a life filled with real love, the kind that uplifts instead of imprisons. As my parents were led away in handcuffs, neither looked back at me. I watched them go, feeling not the closure I had hoped for, but the weight of a chapter ending. The road to healing stretched before me, long and uncertain, but for the first time, it was a path entirely my own. 1 year after the sentencing, I stood in the living room of my new apartment in Seattle, watching the rain trace patterns on the windows that I could open and close freely. My physical recovery had plateaued, leaving me with slightly diminished lung capacity and occasional breathing difficulties that would likely remain for life. The psychological healing, however, remained an ongoing journey. Twice weekly therapy sessions had become the framework around which I rebuilt my life. Dr. Elena, my trauma specialist, had helped me understand that my parents' behavior reflected their own profound dysfunctions rather than any failure on my part. You cannot make sense of the senseless, she had told me during an early session, when I was still desperately searching for a reason, some explanation that would make their betrayal comprehensible. Some people are so broken inside that they see love as ownership. Your parents could not separate loving you from controlling you. Support groups for survivors of family abuse had provided another crucial pillar in my recovery. Sitting in circles with others who understood the unique pain of betrayal by those who should have protected us, I found validation and community. Their stories, while different from mine in the details, shared the same core of manipulation and control. Slowly, I had built what Dr. Elena called my chosen family, a network of supportive friends who demonstrated what healthy relationships actually looked like. Amanda had been my rock throughout the ordeal, taking unpaid leave from her job to stay with me during the worst of my physical recovery and sitting steadfastly beside me through every day of the trial. My father's brother, Uncle Paul, and his wife had welcomed me into their home during the months of legal proceedings, providing a safe haven when the media attention became overwhelming. They had helped me sort through the complicated emotions of grieving people who were still alive but lost to me forever. 6 months after the trial, I had made the decision to leave California altogether. The move to Seattle represented a fresh start in a city where nobody knew my story unless I chose to share it. I found a position at a marketing firm that valued my creativity and respected my boundaries, a novel experience. After years of having neither respected, my new apartment became a sanctuary designed entirely around my comfort and security. I installed extra smoke detectors, fire extinguishers in every room, and a state-of-the-art security system, not out of paranoia, but as concrete reminders that I now controlled my environment. The large windows that dominated the living room wall were my favorite feature, offering expansive views, and more importantly, the ability to open them wide whenever I chose. 3 months after settling in Seattle, I began speaking at support groups for survivors of family abuse. Sharing my story helped others recognize the warning signs of controlling relationships while allowing me to reclaim the narrative of my own life. What began as occasional talks evolved into a more formal role as an advocate. The Rachel Anderson Foundation took shape almost organically, beginning as a website offering resources for those escaping controlling family situations and growing into a nonprofit that provided emergency housing, legal assistance, and therapy for survivors. The work gave purpose to my pain, transforming my experience into a resource that could help others find their way to freedom. Learning to trust again proved to be one of my greatest challenges. Every new relationship, even simple friendships, triggered initial anxiety. Was this person's kindness genuine, or the beginning of manipulation? Did their questions reflect real interest, or were they gathering information to use against me later? Dr. Elena helped me develop tools to distinguish between healthy interest and controlling behavior, to recognize the difference between appropriate boundaries and isolation tactics. Trust is not an all-or-nothing proposition, she reminded me. It is built gradually, verified through consistent actions over time. 18 months after the fire, I made the difficult decision to visit my parents in prison. Many people in my support network questioned this choice, concerned it would reopen healing wounds. But I needed to see them in this context powerless and contained to fully process that they could never hurt me again. The visits were conducted separately, with my father first. He had aged dramatically, his once commanding presence diminished by the prison uniform and the institutional setting. He spoke little, offering no apology or explanation, just occasional comments about prison conditions and bland questions about my health. My mother's approach was different, and in many ways more disturbing. She maintained the fiction that everything she had done had been motivated by love and concern for my well-being. "One day you will understand," she said, reaching for my hand across the visitor's table. I pulled back before she could touch me. "When you have children of your own, you will realize that sometimes love means making impossible choices." I left the prison with the clarity I had sought, though not in the way I had expected. There would never be a satisfying explanation or genuine remorse from either of them. The closure I needed would not come from their acknowledgement, but from my own decision to move forward without it. In the process of helping others, I discovered that healing, while never complete, became more manageable with time and purpose. The nightmares grew less frequent. The reflexive fear when hearing footsteps behind my bedroom door gradually faded. I learned to distinguish between healthy caution and paralyzing anxiety. Today, as I prepare for a speaking engagement at a national conference on family abuse, I can look back at the past 2 years and recognize how far I have come. The scars remain both physical and emotional, but they no longer define me. They are simply part of a larger story, one that includes survival growth and even joy. The family we are born into shapes us, but it does not have to determine our future. Real love sets free rather than imprisons. It uplifts rather than controls. It celebrates independence rather than punishing it. This is the message I share whenever I tell my story. To those of you watching who may recognize elements of control or manipulation in your own relationships, please know that you deserve freedom. Help is available. You are not alone. And if you have someone in your life whose love comes without conditions or controls, treasure that gift. I would love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. Have you ever had to rebuild trust after betrayal? What helped you heal? Please like and subscribe if my story resonated with you, and share this video with anyone who might need to hear that survival is possible even after the deepest betrayal. Thank you for listening to my journey, and remember, the family we choose can be more meaningful than the family we are born into.